Going to be looking at more with ionic compounds. Last time we looked at how we go from the name of the ionic compound to coming up with the formula. Today we're going to do just the opposite. You're going to have the formula and you're going to come up with the name. All right, so still some of the same ideas. We have to look at the positive charges and the negative charges. Remember, positive charges are our metal ions that are called cations, and the negative charges are the non-metal ions called the anions. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is look at the formula, look at the parts of the formula. And remember, the first part is the metal or the cation, or it could be a polyatomic ion. Either one would be fine. You have to check the list of elements to see if it needs a Roman numeral. Remember, if it's a transition metal, they require a Roman numeral because they can have more than one charge. All right, so remember, the Roman numeral tells us the charge of that transition metal. Then the second part is the anion, or it could also be a negatively charged polyatomic ion. And to name the anion, if it's an element, you end with "ide." So just like the last time we saw, like the first problem had sulfide, so that's just sulfur, and you take off the part and you change the ending to "ide." So like some examples I have listed here for you: oxygen changes to oxide, chlorine changes to chloride, etc., etc. If it is a polyatomic ion for the second part, for the negative anion part, you just keep the name. You're not going to change the name of the polyatomic ion. All right? So, sounds easy. Let's check it out and see if it is. Okay? So, our first one should be one that you already know. It's NaCl. Okay? So, we just look at this. Na, of course, is sodium. Let's get my pen on. Maybe? Anyone? Bueller? There we go. So sodium, Na is sodium, so we just write sodium. All right, and then Cl is chlorine, so we just write chloride. When we change that last part to the ide, so it's chloride. So easy, right? Let's look at number 2. Mg is magnesium, so we just write magnesium. Br is bromine. Now, the fact that there's a 2 here for Br, that doesn't do anything to the name. We don't have to worry about that right now. So if there's a number there, don't let that get you frazzled or anything. Okay? We're just looking at the symbol. We're just looking at the element symbol. So since it's Br, it's bromine. So remember, we changed that to bromide. So bromide. And that's all it is. All right? So easy, easy. Okay, now, let's look at the third one. So Li is lithium. So that's no problem. Okay? But SO4 is a polyatomic ion. Okay? And one of the things that you guys are going to have to be able to do is you're going to have to get to that point where you are going to recognize a polyatomic ion. You may not necessarily have to have it completely memorized, but you're going to have to be able to look at a formula and go, oh, SO4, that's a polyatomic ion. I may not know what SO4 means, but I recognize that it's a polyatomic ion. I can look at my sheet and find out, oh, that's sulfate. All right? So SO4 is sulfate. Remember, it's a polyatomic ion, so you don't change the name, but SO4 is sulfate. All right? So no problem. So this one, number 4, we actually have 2 polyatomic ions. Okay? So NH4 is ammonium. And SO4, like we just saw, is sulfate. All right? So this is NH4 is ammonium, and SO4 is sulfate. Okay? So again, got to get to that point where you recognize polyatomic ions. Number 5, K is potassium. And Cn is a polyatomic ion. Look at your chart. Cn is cyanide. All right, so there it is. So potassium cyanide. All right, so this is pretty easy. Not a big deal, right? Okay, I am going to do number 7 real quick. Let's look at number 7. Number 7 is Mn2O3. Mn, as you should know, is manganese. Manganese is a transition metal, all right? So this is where we got to worry about our Roman numerals, all right? Now, this one's going to be a little bit interesting. So let's just write manganese, all right? And we know that O is oxygen, so it's going to be oxide, all right? So let's leave a little space for our Roman numeral, and we'll write oxide. Okay, now, here's how we got to figure out the Roman numeral. What we have to do is look at our subscripts, and since we have a 2 and a 3 there, that's going to tell me that you're going to have to use the lowest common multiple to come up with your charge, okay? And whenever you see a 2 and a 3, you should just pretty much always think 6, all right? So we'd have to multiply this 2 times a 3 to get our 6, and multiply the 3 with the oxygen times a 2 to get a 6. All right. So this 3 right here tells me that this was the charge for manganese. Okay. So we're kind of going backwards from what we did the last time when we had to use the lowest common multiple. Okay. So this 3. So we're going to put the Roman numeral 3 here in parentheses. All right, so this 3 represents the charge for manganese. Okay, now the 2 with the oxygen, we don't need to do anything with that. All right, remember, because oxygen, it's a non-metal, so we don't have to worry about that. But you do have to do this. Okay, now if you were just to write manganese oxide, technically that would be wrong. Okay, so you have to make sure that when you have a transition metal, you have to make sure that you check to make sure you need a Roman numeral or not. All right. Now, what I want to do is same thing as the last video. I would like for you to pause the video and do the last 4 on your own. When you get done, unpause the video to check your answers. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and explain the rest of these and get answers. All right. So for number 6, Mg of course is magnesium. Okay, and C2H3O2, that is a polyatomic ion, that's acetate, so it's just magnesium acetate. All right, so this is a polyatomic ion. Okay, let's go down to number 8. We have SnOH2. Sn is 10. Okay. And OH is hydroxide, polyatomic ion again. So the 10 is a transition metal, so we're going to have to go through and kind of calculate what the Roman numeral should be. So actually, let me erase this so we have enough room here. The board is kind of playing around with me. All right, so 10, I'm sorry. 10. All right, and then the OH is hydroxide. I'm going to leave a little bit of room here for my Roman numeral. Okay, so let's look at this. Hydroxide has a -1 charge, but this 2 here tells me that they had to have 2 of them. All right, so that means you had to multiply this one by 2. So if I had to multiply this by 2, to have a total charge of a -2, that means this 10 had to have a total charge of a +2, all right, because remember they have to balance out. So that means the Roman numeral for 10 is 2. And again, we put that in parentheses. Okay, so it's 10,2 hydroxide. All right, number 9, iron. We have iron again. Transistor metal, so we're going to leave a little space for a Roman numeral, SO4, another polyatomic ion, it's sulfate. Oh, my pen is going crazy. Okay? Alright, now, let's look at this. The 4 is part of the polyatomic ion, so we're not really looking at that 4 as far as figuring out the charges. So if you just look at the charge, sulfate has a -2 charge. And since there's no other numbers here within the formula, no other subscripts, that tells me if sulfate is a -2 charge, then this iron has to have a +2 charge. So that means I have a Roman numeral of 2 here after the iron. Okay? Now, look at number 10. Number 10, same elements, iron and sulfate, but notice the sulfate has a subscript of 3 after it, and iron has a subscript of 2 after it, okay? So let's think about what we did for number 7 with magnesium oxide. I told you if you've got a 2 and a 3 as your subscripts, that you should pretty much think lowest common multiple of 6, all right? So let's write this out. So I've got iron, and I've got sulfate. All right, so since I have a 2, well, let's track. Let's go back. We know that sulfate is a -2 charge, but since there's a 3 there, that means I had to multiply that by 3 to get a total of -6, right? So since there's a 2 here for iron, that means you had to multiply that by 3 to get a total of a +6. So this 3 right here becomes the charge. So I have 1, 2, 3 for my Roman numeral here. I apologize, this pen is acting crazy. Alright? Yep. So let me write that out a little bit better over here. So it's going to be iron 3, and the Roman numeral in parentheses, sulfate. Okay? So check your answers. See how you did. Again, we're going to work on this a lot in class. So if you're struggling, don't worry about it. You'll have lots of time to ask for questions and ask for help. Okay? Remember, make sure you ask for help. All right? We'll see you later.